Robots are red here. In this is SumpPump. SumpPump is a 6 HP stereo noise gate or compressor by me, Robots are red. You have attack and release controls of the gate or compressor. There's a threshold control, the floor control, which is kind of like your compressor ratio, an output level, and then we have an engage input to manually engage the gate or compressor, CV control over threshold and floor, and there's the duck input, which is an envelope follower that's inverted and applied to the level of the output. And we have an envelope output that always outputs a full envelope. So with SumpPump, we can take something like this and do something like this with it. Or take the quieter parts and boost them. You could do softer, more general compression. Or you could get extreme with it. And you can find some sweet spots with bass and kicks with the attack and release all the way down. And here it is with stereo, which gets unique because the internal envelope follower that is applied to the threshold comparator is only going to the left input, and the right input is not going to the threshold. So if I unplug the left input, we're not going to get any action going on with the envelope generator here. So in a nutshell, that's what SumpPump sounds like. So we've seen and heard some of what SumpPump can do, but how does it exactly work? SumpPump takes the left input, runs it through an envelope follower, and that envelope follower signal is compared against the threshold. In gate mode, if the signal is below the threshold, it will engage our envelope. In comp mode, if the signal is above the threshold, it'll engage our envelope. And when our envelope is engaged, we have our attack time, and we have our release time. The attack and release can go from about 1 millisecond to about 5 seconds. You'll see that the attack and release times are actually really quick, so when you feed a lower frequency into it, sometimes you could catch some resonation from the attack and release times. So that's great. We have this envelope, but what's it doing? It's being applied to the volume of our master audio as determined by our level knob and our floor knob here. Our level is at unity at about 3 o'clock for both the floor and threshold. So when the envelope is engaged and the floor is at about 3 o'clock here, it's not really doing anything. If we turn it clockwise from here, it's going to apply the envelope positively to give us up to a 2 times or 10 decibel boost with soft clipping. We also get 2-time boosts with the level for some compression makeup. And then we have a lot of room here to play with the envelope being applied negatively to the VCA. all the way down to completely silent. Since there's an envelope output, we could also use this as an envelope generator with the engage input and the envelope out with attack, sustain, and release times when it's in comp mode. Or use it as a VCA by throwing it into gate mode, put the floor all the way down, put an input into input right, and then throw your envelope into the floor input. Now let's dive a little deeper into SumpPump. So we could see this module can get pretty quickly into the extreme territory, and I think it works great with drums in the gate mode or the comp mode, and you could kind of extract new beats out of your existing beats or your existing synth sequence, whatever. As long as it has like a good amount of dynamics, it works really great with this module. So you can kind of break down a beat by turning our threshold up and break it down to basically just some clicks, because it's only the very loudest little snippets are getting through. And let's listen to comp mode. So we can get a little bit more syncopated in comp mode. So we have that engage input. So I could send a gate in and auto engage it whenever I want. So what I can do is have my threshold all the way up in comp mode here, and then my envelope won't engage, especially if I turn my attack and release up a little bit. And then I could patch my envelope out into something a little bit more interesting here, where let's say I have this panned left, and I have the envelope out, and I throw that into my CV input. And now, when I engage the envelope, let's turn our floor up to 3 o'clock here, so the envelope's not really doing much. And now when I hit the gate, getting some panning on it, and we can adjust the volume of the right side and then the left side to compensate with the floor here, so I can make the right side a little louder, or I can make the right side a little quieter. Let's give it a little bit more release. Or let's say I wanted to distort my signal a bit. I'm going to plug into Crest here, and I'm going to plug my envelope generator into the CV input here. And we're going to get some crazy boost and drive when I hit the envelope. So I could turn this down a little bit to compensate, which actually works out great. And now let's play with the threshold to get it to auto-activate every once in a while. Let's smooth out this drum beat a little. Now, when I'm getting the snare hits, I'm getting some distortion on it. And let's go back to gate mode. That is what SumpPump sounds like with some drums. But now let's check out a synth voice going through SumpPump. So right now, I have a typical East Coast patch going into SumpPump. I have 3 saw waves from CDOs going into Synergy to mix them all together. I have the mix output going into Marsupial to low-pass filter this, and that is going into Mailroom as the envelope generator in VCA. And that is going into SumpPump. So right now I am heavily gating the sequence going into SumpPump to show how we could use it to kind of break down a more complex sequence, and then we could bring in the more complex parts with either the floor or the threshold. So with this I could do a nice riser of the rest of our riff. And there's our full sequence. And we could go back down. And we could also mess with our threshold to kind of pull more and more from our sequence to not get cut. You'll find that there's some sweet spots with threshold depending on what your sequence is, what your input level is, but right here it's right between this range is our sweet spots. And we could play with our attack and release to make it choppier. And let's see what the compressor mode does. See how we can chop up this sequence. Now let's add some effects into this to kind of sweeten it up. I'll do that with Bib here. Add a little drive, echo, and reverb. Now let's try it with a more even sequence, like something like this. You can see we're getting a little choppiness. So we could use it to kind of adjust our envelope shape in a way and make it choppier. And then when we want, we could pull the whole thing back in. Let's check this out in comp mode. It's going to kind of give it a reversey effect. Let's add some effects. And that is using SumpPump as an East Coast voice to kind of chop things up, and break down your sequence a bit. I'm going to show an interesting way to kind of pulsify your VCO wave with SumpPump. Right now I have it in gate mode, meaning that any signal below the threshold is going to activate our floor. So when I turn this up, see we got that buzzing right there, which means we caught right in the middle of that oscillator as far as the threshold value with our attack and release all the way down. If I turn it up, we lose those harmonics we're getting. And this is with our floor at basically unity. Now watch what happens when I turn this down. Let's turn level up so we can see the waveform better. And I'm going to turn the floor down. See, we get a nice pulsified waveform. And when I turn the threshold, we get a little bit of pulse width action. So you can see right in this range here, we're getting some nice pulse width action. And then if I turn the attack and release up a little bit, it kind of smooths it out, but it gives us a little bit more of an interesting waveform. Now let's lower this frequency to a more bass frequency. Now we have even more pulse width range with the threshold just because of the speed of the envelope follower. So you can see we have a much wider range of this pulse width, and then with our floor we could adjust that angle of the pulse. We could drive it or get it down to 0. And now it's kind of like full pulse width square wave where it zeroes out when you get to the end. But we could always bring that up a little bit so you don't fully lose it. And when you get triangles on both sides with some fun harmonic goodness in the middle. Let's check out comp mode. It just flips our waveform, and it does it on the other side. And that is creating some interesting waveforms with a VCO into SumpPump. But what happens if we take this input and put it into the right, which doesn't go into the envelope follower, and we use the left to sidechain from another oscillator? We could get a real interesting amplitude modulation. And then adjust our threshold. So let's CV our threshold and floor real quick. Now I have some LFOs going into threshold and rate, and we have a more constant motion than just that. We get really cool effects. Now let's mess with the rate of that oscillator going in. And that is giving some interesting amplitude modulation and waveform modulation to a VCO with SumpPump. Now let's check out the duck input on SumpPump. So I have the same synth sequence as before, but instead of doing any like cutting and chopping like this, I'm going to just have it not doing anything and set the level at Unity here at about 3 o'clock, just in case. Let's check out what this duck does. So first, I'm going to just send a trigger in, which is what we're hearing in the right ear right now. And that trigger is going to duck our signal. And it has a little bit of a decay on it because there's an envelope follower on that duck input. And it's just balanced nicely to also work with triggers or gates, along with something like a kick. So if we patch that kick straight into the duck input, we get a similar effect. And then the key to dialing in the duck is what I like to do is use a little attenuator. Here I'm just using a little tidbit attenuator. And plug the signal in. And go into the duck. Right now it's fully off. Let's turn it all the way up. And I'm going to just turn it down until we get to a good level. That's better, I think, than full cutting. So if we just take care of the level going in, the duck input takes care of the rest. Let's say we want to duck with the engage input instead. I'm going to take this trigger again and just put it right into the engage input. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a release. And then if we turn down our floor, we get to control the amount of ducking. We can see it's not quite as sharp as the duck input. So each kind of has its own character. Now let's try the kick audio into the engage input. Again, here's the kick. And let's see what this does. Yeah, you can pretty much do the same thing, as long as your attack and release are not fully off, where it'll kind of oscillate with the attack and release times. Just turn those up a little bit. And we got some nice ducking control. And that is the duck and engage inputs. So we've looked at these two ways of kind of doing hard sidechaining or a pseudo envelope engage sidechaining. But what about real sidechaining? We can do that in mono with SumpPump by sending our main signal into the input on the right. I have this in comp mode, so let's throw this kick again into input left. So we can see it's engaging our envelope, but it's only engaging it when it gets to a certain threshold, similar to the engage, but we can adjust that threshold for more or less choppiness. Let's add some release to this. You see it's a nice loud kick, so even with the threshold all the way up, it's still triggering it for the sidechain. And let's see what this does in gate mode. It's going to be kind of weird. We can kind of get the opposite of our compress. But if we want real sidechaining, we do the compress. And then we can adjust our attack and release times. And the floor is basically our ratio, or we can boost it. we could cut it to fully silent. And the good thing with this sidechaining is we also get our output, though it is going to be compressed. We still get a little bit, and we get some interesting effects of that output as well. Now this brings us to some self-patching here with our envelope out. Now let's check this out. We can throw it in the floor, and it'll kind of cut and then boost and does this weird kind of flangey slapback effect. We could throw it in our threshold, which will cut our signal faster and gives us a little bit more of an exponential range in our threshold. So that versus taking this out, we're getting more bumps. So you could kind of make it a little bit subtler, and you could get a little bit higher threshold here to where it's fully cutting off rather than turning on more from every hit. And if we self-patch and engage, it's just going to loop and stay engaged. What if we throw that envelope into the duck? Then we get even more duck control, but we don't have that level control still. And that is some self-patching with SumpPump. Alright, so now I have some drums going into SumpPump, and now I'm going to chop it up, and I'm routing the output into Crest to do some fun wave folding afterwards, and we're going into Bib. So let's turn on a little bit of effects from Bib. I'm going to turn that verb down a little. And let's start chopping up this drums. Let's go into gate mode. That's better for chopping drums. So we got a nice chopped up sequence here, and we could kind of fill it out when we want. Now let's change this drive into wave folding with Crest. Turn the echo off. Let's do comp mode for some weirdness. Real noisy breakdown. It always gives a kind of reversey effect. Plus, let's turn the attack up instead of the release. It'll give us less of a reversey effect. And it gives it a nice kind of stuttering effect, like some other things. And it gives it an interesting kind of stuttering effect in the compressor mode. Let's go back to gate. And let's modulate our threshold. And I'm going to attenuate that with an LFO. So now we get some nice movement to our sequence. especially if we turn up the LFO. It's giving us some interesting effects. Let's go to comp mode. Actually, let's go back to gate mode, and I'm going to turn the decay up instead of the attack. Ooh yeah, nice little breakdown here. So we can kind of punch this in too. If we're playing, we can have our normal beat here. And then when we want to really break it down, we just pull these in. Pull some effects in to kind of smooth it out. And could go back to our main sequence. And that is some interesting chopping into wave folding with SumpPump and Crest. All right, now let's look at SumpPump as a noise suppressor for guitar. So I have some heavily distorted guitar coming in. But I want to suppress that. So I need to find that right threshold level for our volume. So there's a playing, and when we cut it, we want the envelope to engage. And we want it in gate mode. And we want the floor all the way down. So you want to add a little bit of attack for that envelope coming in to shut off our sound so it doesn't cut it immediately, but we want it to attack immediately. So the attack of the release of our gate is the release knob. So there is a nice quick attack versus that, where it kind of fades in. So we can see I'm getting a little bit of a choppiness, but I am routing into Crest first to give me a little bit of a drive and wave folding. What if I went just straight into SumpPump? So now we're getting a nice reaction because we're not getting all that noise from the drive and wave folding, which is fun. But so for this, it's just my guitar going through my Wampler Dracaris distortion pedal and into my case, into SumpPump. So now we get some really nice noise suppression when we stop playing, so we don't have that background noise of this going on. No one likes that. And this also works great if you have something heavily compressed in your rack and you don't want that hum when, say, your drums that are heavily compressed aren't playing. You're going to get that noise like this, and you could do the same thing. And that is SumpPump with guitar. Now let's take a look at this envelope output. Let's say I didn't have mailroom in this case, so I don't have an envelope generator here, and I don't have a VCA. So I'm going to take my audio signal from the filter, and I'm going to go right into Mangles over here, which is also a VCA. And let's pull the output. And I'll just pan it all the way left here, so we don't lose our level. And then let's patch the envelope out from SumpPump into the VCA in on Mangles. So now when the envelope's engaged, we open up our VCA. So now I'm just going to move my gate from mailroom over to the engage input. And I'm going to turn attack and release all the way down. And as long as we have it in comp mode, it doesn't really matter what your threshold or floor settings are, or level for that matter. So let's play our sequence. And we have attack and release times. And let's actually look at this envelope in the scope. And I'm actually going to molt my envelope into the filter as well. So let's stop this real quick and let's look at the shape of the envelopes. I'm going to turn attack and release all the way up, and I'm going to pop over into gate mode to turn it on, and let's see the shape of the attack. Let's zoom out, do that again. So we can see it does have a hint of an exponential curve to it, but it's more close to linear than exponential. But there's still some curve to it, which is interesting. And that's our max attack and release times. And this is it as an envelope generator. Simple, attack, sustain, release. Let's add those effects back in. And that is SumpPump as an envelope generator. And let's switch this theory up, and let's say we don't have a VCA, but we do have an envelope generator. So let's pretend mailroom doesn't have a VCA. I'm going to go into the gate input on that. I'm going to plug back into the output on SumpPump. Let's patch the low pass into input right on SumpPump, so it's not going to go into this threshold floor at all. So we'll pull the audio from right. And I'm going to turn the gate mode on so we could engage our envelope. And I'm going to put the floor all the way down. And I'm going to take our envelope output. First, I'm molting that again to the filter. And this output is going to go into the floor input. So now, when we engage the envelope, it's going to turn our floor knob up. And the envelope amount could actually boost and give some soft drive to your signal. So I'm going to turn the level down a little, and we should hopefully get a little drive, a little more saturation with our signal. And because floor, I believe, is exponential, we get more of an exponential curve to our audio. Got to turn this way down. And that is using SumpPump as a VCA. So with this patch, we're going to look at some kind of call and response sort of effects with SumpPump and the envelope out. So right now, I have this weird crunchy drum beat going in. And I could do the regular chopping. This is in compressor mode. Or I could do gate mode. But what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take some filtered noise and I'm going to go into mingles here. Let's turn that up. And I'm going to put the envelope output of SumpPump into the VCA input on mingles here. So now every time SumpPump is cutting the drums, it's filling that space with the noise. And we can do it in comp mode, where only the loudest parts are going to get accented with the noise. And we can not cut it and just kind of add that noise in for some additional percussion. Let's listen to that other drum beat. If I turn the attack and release down more, you get more of that fluttering sort of effect. It's all about finding that right threshold level. And we could do something like with the gate here, where we have no drum beat at all, and I'm going to cut it. And so I'll put the threshold all the way up, and I'll just start playing my drum beat. And I'm going to just turn down the threshold and slowly reveal the drum beat from the noise. And switch to comp mode. And that is using SumpPump and the envelope out into the VCA of something else for a kind of call and response effect. And that's it for this video on SumpPump by me, Robots Are Red. Until next time.